You're a spiritual being in physical form, a dichotomy of light and dark, where energy equals mass on a journey designed to fulfill our personal legend and purpose. To use humanity throughout, to amplify and transcend, tame the ego, raise the humanity. That's a signpost up ahead. Your next stop, the High Vibe Zone. I need that hype song every single day. Hey,
I can listen to that every day.
I love it. What a great way to start a gathering.
I agree. Well, welcome everyone to the High Vibe Zone. If this is your first time, you are in the right place, not by mistake. If this is not your first time, welcome back. We have an amazing topic and conversation, and I'm so excited that I have Maria and Andrea here with me because we are diving into something that we often talk about pretty frequently in and out, and it comes up a lot in our spaces. So we're excited to talk about it. But first, before we get into everything, Maria, Andrea, how are y'all doing?
Wonderful now. Like there's magic just happening, the grapefruit, the vitamin C. I'm good. I'm ready to go.
Nice.
I think Wednesdays are one of my favorite days of the week, along with Mondays. They're pretty on par here. Yeah, just a very fulfilling morning and afternoon. And now we get to be together. We have some coffee. So the day is just moving and grooving.
Nice. Super good to hear. And for everyone that is watching, let us know where you're joining us from. Drop what you're grateful for in the comments. Gratitude amplifies the attitude. So please let us know that you are here. Also, throughout this conversation, if any questions come up as we're going to be diving in, please drop them in. We will do our best to get to every question. And if not, we can answer them in the replay comments. So, Maria and Andrea, we ready for this? Ready to have this conversation?
Oh yeah.
Buckle in.
Okay.
LinkedIn.
Huh?
Buckle in, LinkedIn.
And YouTube buckle in as well. We're bringing it to you. So let me start off by saying, like, as I mentioned before, this is a conversation that comes up, and Maria, you've taken How to Become a Racist 3 times now, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's always some form of, I'm white or like this comes up a lot. And I shared that the Be Less White article, which I point out, like, which white people are we talking about? Because a lot of the things that I'm hearing, especially around it just seems very general, and I'm just wondering, like, and I've asked this question before, but no one's been able to answer it. So I figured we just bring it to the High Vibe Zone and talk about it. Which white people are we talking about? Because I think it really does help us understand the conversation and, like, where it's supposed to go, where it's supposed to be molded, and if we are actually helping the situation by being very general with that component. So does that sound like a pretty accurate way of how we got here? We're like, let's just talk about it in the High Vibe Zone. Why not? Other people have the same question, so let's just dive into that.
I think so. I think, and this is such a broad topic. I wonder if we should start a little bit, and Andrea, feel free to chime in with the history of, like, the background and context of what do we mean here when we say white, and then also, like, how that's rooted within the history of our language, and because the term white and all the race terms that we use are so modern, really. So how can we unpack that a little bit?
Before I chime in and add, Sharice, do you want to respond?
Well, the first thing that comes to my mind in terms of white is, I guess, this natural vision of just skin tone, and that basically being the only imagery that I have, because I think is the opposite is true. If I think of black, I think of the skin tone and like what that looks like. However, um, studying anthropology, being around a bunch of humans, we know that it is not that. And that perception of what white is, whether it's identity, it cannot really be confirmed by a visual. And so I think when we talk about in this context, we're going off of skin tone. We're going to start there because I think it's the way that it's been being used and been used. But I know that as we talk a little bit more, we're going to realize that there's it's more than skin deep. Not trying to like go into it, but it's a little bit different than that. So hopefully that answers, Maria, kind of that component. And then Andre, anything you wanted to add to that?
A little story.
Mm.
Maria, I like, even though it's such a corporate term to me, the unpacking, but I like that you said that because it is like an onion, or like there's so much within it that we do need to take a look at it from a variety of different perspectives. And the story that comes to mind actually is from college for me and my sociologist professor, where she's a person of color, but she took offense to some of the terminology that was used, and it was the opposite of what we're talking about today, or actually the same thing. But she's like, when you say black, who are you talking about? If it's African American, who are you talking about? Because I'm not. I'm Caribbean. So that, I think, kind of tees up part of the conversation that we want to talk about today. And it goes back, Charisse, to what you were saying too. Skin tone, yeah, that's one layer of this onion, or one piece that we're pulling out of the box. But what else is there? How do we define these things? When I was going to say, how do we define these things when society tries to oversimplify to make it easy for everyone to understand? It's easy to have a box.
Just group everybody into one thing, which is part of the problem that we got ourselves into today by doing that. I like your story because, especially around Juneteenth, when companies like I will never forget this woman, we were talking and she was like, the company was asking her, she's black, and she's like, they were asking her what what she thought about Juneteenth and her thoughts, and she kind of was like really uncomfortable. She's like, I'm from Jamaica. Like, we don't have the same history as Juneteenth. And like, I don't know, I'm just learning just like you. But again, that grouping of really does cause some challenges when we are trying to address a serious problem. If we grouping everyone together, it really doesn't allow us to get down to the root, because we are very lunar in that way, and everyone is a little bit different in that way. But then also too, it just perpetuates more. It's like we talk about stereotypes and how to become a racist, and it's like the way you identify a stereotype is you take the word all or everyone or this, and you put their description, and then you put a word, and it's like that. There's no way all women can be this or all men can be that. And so when we think of, whenever I have heard the term white people, it doesn't, there is no balance in that. Want to give a shout out to Gerard joining us from the ATL. Hey, welcome to the High Vibe Zone. And talking about culture defines it. All right, we're going to dive into all of that. Thank you for joining. And please, any questions, drop them in. Comments, helpful. Maria, I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add to that.
Yeah, I think a lot of us are seeing, especially on the news, on LinkedIn itself, in articles, the general conversation and temperature of this topic is a lot of people equating white with not being diverse or being a diversity. So that's part of this conversation is like, when you use the word I'm white, or like they're white, like, what do you mean? Because Martin Luther King said it beautifully when he said, don't judge anyone by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. And that just didn't mean only for Black people. It means the opposite as well. We shouldn't judge someone who has a lighter skin tone by their skin tone either. So I think this is where a lot of people, and like we're entering kind of muddy waters, is almost equating white with something else. And it's like, we've talked about it before, every human is diverse. And when we use the term white, do we mean like European American? Like, Andrea, you're a great example. Like, and even myself, I have a lighter skin tone than Charisse, maybe a little bit darker than Andrea, but on the forms, I have to check white, but I'm Colombian, born in Colombia. So technically, I'm not white. Am I white? I don't know. Why do we join words like African American or Hispanic American or Colombian American, and we don't do the same for like Europeans? So like Hungarian Americans, right? We would just slap the label white. So what do we mean by white when we use it?
I love that you said that. And that is, I think, at the core of a lot of the conversations that we've had internally too. And it's Gerard's comment about culture defines it. I think what's brilliant in that is that there's so many different cultures. So how do we, white, black is a color, but say for instance in Hungary, you would define it by American terminology as white on white racism, because if, at least back in the day, a couple generations ago, you had Hungarians proper and then there were gypsies. Same color skin, but other than. And there was a reason to differentiate and separate them out, justified or not, but there was a reason. So it was less about people who were considered minorities because of their skin tone and more about a way of life. But that became the other than and the differentiator and the separation. So for me, when I was growing up, I didn't have the US narrative and the US history that formed my opinion of humans. Mine was European based. So just it's different. So when we're in this narrative today, to me and Charisse, when you and I met, it was more about like, why isn't it just humanity? Period.
Well, I understand that. I think to paint another side to this too is the words that we are using right now, white, black, Asian, um, I think there was another one, was created by this dude named Carlos Linnaeus, who created the 4 categories that we still use today. Those 4 categories were created to amplify segregation and really and then falls into classism. Came into the next thing. It's like, what class are you now? And we've adopted those things, but what we're also adopting is the energy behind how these were created, and we're trying to solve for a problem or a situation that isn't transcending. So going back to this like be less white from Coca-Cola and giving a list of what to do to be less white, it's like, well, how much whiteness does someone have? Like, what if they are mixed? What about people who've been raised by people that were white? Like, where does this, and again, if you were to do a check for someone, like, what does that look like? And again, to your point, Maria, we are using much of that visual to try and solve the problem in the same vibration that it was created from. I see you as white. That's the problem. This is the solution, but I'm still operating from the same problem. Like it's not, the model is flawed. We can't just keep grouping people because I will say, like, it doesn't feel good when it's like all black people or like black people. It's like that's a narrative created by society to continue to perpetuate these problems because we won't be able to solve them if we're continuing this divisiveness. And to this day, no one's been able to tell me which white people are you talking about people from Hungary? Are you talking like Maria, to your point, the people that like this is the box that I had to check? Is it you? I mean, I look at my kids. Is it the half of them? Which my husband's just like, I just checked that box too. He's, so where do we land in this? And Gerard, thank you so much for just the comments because our differences make us who we are. Be unique or part of the collective experience isn't in turn bad. In response to Andrea's, why aren't we just humans?
Mic drop.
Why aren't we just be? I'm sure we'll get to this in a little bit. We have another comment. I don't know. It's not showing the name, but welcome to the High Vibe Zone. Great example. Hispanics and Latinos sometimes check white based on the skin tone, but it generalizes the term. Exactly. So putting it in perspective, because usually when I've heard, or let's use Coca-Cola, for example, they were trying to teach a demographic of their population anti-bias or anti-racism training, whatever it may be. And so they're speaking to the specific demographic, but it doesn't necessarily apply to everyone in the demographic if we're using just by sight what they are or what box they have to check. So are you actually affecting the change that you need to affect if we can't understand like where the root is actually coming from? Does that make sense?
I think it's like what is the intention behind why you're asking and why is it important? And I think that goes to Gerald's point. It's like we're all unique. There is no good or bad. There is no light and dark. Like we need both light and dark. Not talking about skin tone here, but I think as humanity, we've sort of identified certain biases, certain assumptions, certain stereotypes because of people's skin. And if we look at history, like in ancient Rome and in Greece, there was slavery, but it wasn't anything to do with color. And same with in the United States, like we learned recently that indigenous people here, they themselves are part of the slave trade in terms of purchasing Black enslaved people. And so it has, again, nothing to do with the color. And I'll share a story. So on Monday, I was sitting at this like cute little cafe for dinner. And the place inside was really crowded. So I was like, I'm going to go outside. I need some like me time. And of course, I sit next to this other table. And of course, they're talking about race and color. More specifically, what has to do with politics and sort of like voting districts and things like that. And there was a woman who was Latina and she was saying, she was talking to a Black man and they were just having a discussion, like, great. And I was like, sort of eavesdropping. But I was like, this is fascinating. And the woman was saying, you can't pool all Latinos together because, for example, some people might look Latino and they don't speak any Spanish. Maybe they are from like the difference between Hispanic and Latino, that in itself. Some people come from a higher income, some low income. So you can't pool everything together. And she was trying to explain this. And the man was saying the same thing about Black people. He was like, you can't pool all of us together. And then both of them were like, yeah, but white people, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, if you're saying you can pull these people together, why are you bucketing everybody else into white?
It's the narrative, the momentum of the narrative that has been told so often. I think this is a good segue, not even segue, but a good time to share this other story that we talk about in Andrea, unless you had something to say to that, I will hold the story.
Keep going. Eventually, I want to circle back to what Gerard said and his brilliant mic drop comment. But Charisse, I feel like your story will segue into all of that.
Okay. So this is a story from Legacy of the Heart. This is a story that Buddha told his students. So it's really around truth and like what that looks like. So there was so a young widower who loved his 5-year-old son so much was away for business, and bandits came and burned down the entire village and took his son away. When the man returned, he saw the ruins and panicked. He took a charred corpse of an infant to be his own child. And he began to pull his hair, beat his chest, crying uncontrollably. He organized a cremation ceremony and collected the ashes and put them in a very beautiful pouch. And working, sleeping, eating, he carried the bag of ashes with him. One day, his real son escaped from the robbers and found his way home. He arrived at his father's new cottage at midnight and knocked on the door. As you can imagine, at this time, the young father, who was still crying over the bag of ashes, asked who was there. And the child answered, "It's me, Papa. Open the door. It's your son." In his agitated state of mind, the father thought some mischievous boy was making fun of him, and he shouted to the child to go away, and he continued to cry. The boy knocked again and again, but the father refused and let some time passed, and finally the child left. And from that time on, father and son had never saw each other again. After telling the story, the Buddhist said, "Sometime, somewhere, you take something to be the truth. If you cling to it so much, when the truth comes in person and knocks at your door, you will refuse to open it." And so it's such a powerful story when we think of this narrative, just an example of what you shared, Maria. They're like, yeah, you can't bucket all Latinos. You can't, but white people, right? The model is flawed. Why? Because we have taken something to be the truth. And in fact, what's happening in this situation is we're saying from the lens, and we don't use these words often, but for an example of anti-racism, we're basically telling people we want people to not be racist. We want people to not believe that that one is inferior to another or superior to another. But we're using the same logic and energy whenever we do this grouping of, because there's no way to really be able to we use the same logic when we group people together, and we don't allow for anything to transcend from past that. And so we somehow become and perpetuate the same thing that we're trying to solve, and we sit in the same area, and we're like, we want things to change, but you white people, you black people, you this, you that. Nothing is going to change with that. Nothing is going to change with that. It's again, I think we talked about this sometime in the high vibe zone. It's like we have this beautiful destination like that we're trying to get to. And I'm like, hey, Andrea, Maria, you want to go to this beautiful destination? You're like, yeah, let's go. It's like, okay, cool. But first, let me tell you everything that's wrong with everything that you have going on. Cool? All right, cool. Let's get in the car. You're gonna be like, screw that. I don't want to drive with you anywhere. I don't care how beautiful that destination is. Like, there's just ways to approach this. And if we keep approaching it from this concept of white people, but we're not able to say which white people are we talking about? Who are they? Because I mean, both of you have checked the white box. So are we talking about the two of you? Are we talking about a half of someone, that is mixed? Like, are we, where is this coming from? And is it going to help us solve and get to that destination? That's kind of the big, you talk about intent. Is the intention to get to that destination? Well, maybe there's another way to think about this. And by not grouping everyone together, because that is what has caused so much pain and devastation in our past history.
you hit on something that maybe we put a pin in and come back to, because I really want to get to the Gerard like response. But it's a curiosity for me in all the years that I've seen, white, black, Native American, whatever it is, and then Hispanic, but then there's like non-Latino. There's so many boxes, and I'm like, why is Hispanic called out? That to me has been an interesting, like, why are we calling that out, but not people of other cultures or nationalities? Just an interesting thing. Like, why do you have to identify further? Because Maria, as you said, like you check the white box. So to me, it's like, why is the system wanting to know that, but not deeper for others? Like if you're black, why aren't they asking from where? If you're white, why aren't they asking from where? Outside of Hispanic. Anyway, that's one thing that I'd like to circle back to. Maria, if you'd like to, hug that, not stab at, responding to it. But the comment of the collective experience isn't bad. You're right. There's 7 billion people on this planet. There are 7 billion human experiences. There are 7 billion narratives. And within that, how we grow up, who is surrounding us, the communities around us, they shape our perception, our narrative, our reality. But inside of us, what's happening and who we are, the souls that we are, and the outer experience that is shaping all of us creates that human experience. And it doesn't mean that we can't feel a camaraderie with a particular group of people or those who share similar experiences. It's more about, can we all hold space for one another and honor whatever that person is going through, even if that isn't my experience and I don't understand.
I think so much of what you're saying also, what brings to mind is our geographical location. The world is more global now than it ever was. There are more people crossing and mixing and everything. So I saw a comment, Simone, who said that it's getting harder to label groups of people. There's no one dictating we need to label each other as humans. We're all one race. We're all the human race, as we talk about so many times. So it's naturally going to get harder and kind of like pointless to keep labeling ourselves if we want to overcome all of these issues that have clearly impacted people for so long. And because we are talking about it here on LinkedIn, and the reason I think it's important that if you're a leader within your company, if you work in people, culture, HR, the CEO, or if you are whomever in a company, let's think about how this impacts us on a global scale. If you are calling if you're labeling anyone as white or black or whatever you want to label us as, remember that's different in another country. In another country, I'm the majority, not the minority. And we talk about these words a lot here too. But it's like, I'm actually traveling to Colombia tomorrow, where I'm from. I don't get to wear the minority hat there. I am kind of the majority because I am Colombian. But then again, there's elements of classism there and there is colorism there. So we see the same issues, but my whiteness here would not, that's not a label there necessarily. And in other countries, like in Hungary, would they even have that also? Like, what would you be? American? So as companies and people globalize, like, let's think about this logically. Does it make any sense to ask these questions or try and label people in certain ways? Because depending on where you're from, like, you're not going to get it. Like, it just makes no sense.
Well, and on top of that, or to add to that, the question is how and why is this information being used? If it's being asked, it's being used for some purpose. And if we have to identify for government, whatever it is, census, taxes, whatever government form I'm filling out at any point. It's a checkbox on there. But if it's a checkbox on working documents, like for a job, for something, or to get a pass, a visa somewhere, whatever that is, how is that information being used? We don't know, but we offer it, we volunteer it because we have to. It's a system.
There's so much here. I mean, Maria, what you just said, you're like globally. And what came to my mind is that these labels or these things that we're doing it doesn't transcend past the area that it is, which usually means that it's not going to have the universal impact that is needed to make some change. So for example, kindness transcends. A smile transcend to the state. You can take a smile from here, take it to Colombia. A smile is a smile. Like you can transcend this. We can't transcend these labels that we have continued to create for ourselves, and that's causing us to like, you know, get stuck. And to your point, Andrea, what's something that also came up was like, what is the purpose of, like, what's the intention behind that? Like, why am I doing that? Usually, and this is at least what I've seen on LinkedIn, is whenever I have heard like the term white people, it's usually building momentum towards something. And what we've may or may have not talked about in the high vibe zone is the concept of when you are specific with something, you are building momentum to either tell the story or alert a threat or build momentum into a certain direction. When you are general, you slow the momentum down. So if I bring up like, if I'm like, okay, Maria, no, I won't use you as an example. I will use myself. If I bring up eggs, I have I do not like eggs. Eggs do not sit well with me. It's just not a very good thing. There's a lot of momentum built up in that, but like that's being very specific, like eggs, or you want to give them scrambled. Something's like, oh my God. Anyway, not a very like building momentum in that direction where it's like very, if you go general, it's like food, or protein or something like that. It slows the momentum down. So again, I don't turn, my stomach doesn't turn. So whenever we use the news does it perfectly. Here's an example, y'all, if everyone that's listening has probably experienced this. You see a headlines in the news, Black man does this to white person. Why isn't it just, this happened to this person? Because they're building momentum, the stereotype, the bias, whatever has been built from that momentum of the word Black is going to take you somewhere. It's going to either alert you somewhere. And then because we have such a reactionary culture, especially here in America, I mean, the social media platforms use reactions, not responses. We then take it to the next level. So when I'm on LinkedIn and I see a post, the best way I've seen like engagement is like to use that specificity. But is that specificity helping us get to where we're going, or is it more divisive, or is it creating guilt and stuff that, like, listen, if I want somebody to go on a destination with me, I need them to leave to be able to release the baggage and not take on a bunch of stuff. And what I'm seeing from like Coca-Cola and like some of these anti-bias trainings, anti-racist trainings, is it's not like they're calling out a big dynamic of group, but not giving a way to transcend some of this stuff. So I hear it all the time. I'm white. It's like, why would you say it like that? Like, I'm this or I'm that. I know I'm this, it's like, when you're saying this, you're not empowered. And why would we continue to perpetuate that? I would feel really bad if my kids came up to me and be like, well, I'm this. It's like, no, you're much more than that. And you're still learning. And we're in a society that really does profit from we talked about, is racism profitable? The lack of education is profitable. That people don't step out and question these things. So yeah, I just thought about that. Oh, could you guys dive into colorism as is brought up, Maria? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Thanks for responding, by the way. Oh my god, this is awesome. Would y'all like me to start with the colorism or would you? Okay. So, colorism, and Gerard, I can send you some more information on this. We talk about this in Humanity Power, which is a nonprofit working on amplifying humanity to end the isms that are harming our humanity, and colorism is one of them. Colorism really is there's originated, or there's a big origin in the Asian continent, and essentially how it works is it flows into classism, and colorism has to do with the color of your skin. And the example that I have is you could tell if somebody was in a lower class because if they were darker skin, they worked in the field. And if they were of lighter skin, they were that meant that they had, they were not outside and they were in some type of house or office or something like that. Colorism is really big in other countries. It's big in America too. It's usually within culture. So I don't know if, I remember growing up in the 90s, and if you were light skinned, like I wasn't, I'm chocolatey. So if you were light skinned, like you were the thing, you were it, like that's what they portrayed. And so it was really about like your skin tone, even though it really came from this concept of where are you in this hierarchy of society or classism. Because if you were, like I said, if you were out in the fields, you were working a lower class job, that kind of thing. If you were inside, you had like better access, your family was probably well off, things like that. And so that's how people would um, categorize folks. I know in Indonesia, visited Bali, colorism is still there. And in fact, it's a big thing. And so hopefully that explains it correctly. Anybody else want to add to that?
I can only speak from my experience, of course. And being Colombian, I think there is racism, but I think almost colorism is a bigger thing in sort of more everyday life for the exact reason you mentioned. Sort of, it's assumed that if you have a darker skin, but if you're not black, and you have like certain facial features, you are assumed to be of lower class. And the classes there are very, very divided. The middle class is very small. So generally, if you're more whiter or lighter skinned, you're deemed to be more of European descent, which my family, half of it is more European. And so they're kind of viewed as upper class. And then if you're sort of more darker skinned but not black, then you're considered sort of lower class, or like assumed to be. So there are a lot of assumptions and a lot of bias, which at the end of the day is what fuels any ism, colorism, ableism, racism, anything, are those stereotypes and biases. But it's also so ingrained in culture, which is interesting to also bring up. Culture, like for example, if you're white but you're Jewish, that is like very interesting as well, because you as a Jewish person has probably overcome, I mean, obviously many difficulties in your life and probably still face biases and assumptions, but you're also white. So kind of like, how do you weigh that yourself? Because you're really the only one who sort of understands that. So how do we show up for each other with more empathy and more kindness and more intention and humanity? Because there's so much more than our color. As people, there's religion and there's upbringing, and struggles that you can't tell just right off the surface.
I love what you both said. And where it took me is a lot of the coaching sessions that we do within Culture Circle, and your spiritual pathing, or just whatever you're dealing with and coaching. And what gets in people's way often and creates the stumbling roadblocks in any person's journey are the narratives that we're facing, or the narratives that we're carrying because we believe them to be true. When you release those narratives, the world opens up to you. And I know that can be interpreted in a whole bunch of different ways, but our biggest obstacle is ourselves most of the time. How do we get out of that? How do we free ourselves from whatever that narrative is? And if we are in this cycle of negative narratives, we're always looking for the opposite. Sharice, going back to what you said, how do we transcend? How do we pull ourselves up out of that so that it's not a constant argument and a fight? And for me, I can feel energy. I can feel when someone is in this space of just a belief system that is so negative that it's carried within them and creating anxiety. I mean, I saw Simone, she has biracial children. Sharice, you do as well. What does that create for them? For at that age, at that young age. And if you don't have parents who are talking to you and supporting you and helping you become the awesome, awesome human that you are meant to be, as you become an adult, you carry that weight. It becomes present in business and how you interact with the people around you. So going back to, I'm looking at the time too, and I'm like, going back to the article, Sharice, that you shared around Be Less White and the list that came from that presentation. Be less oppressive, be less arrogant, be less certain, be less defensive. I was thinking about these things and I'm like, well, we need to be more. And then I caught myself and I'm like, no, I'm doing the exact thing of what we're trying to share an alternative perspective on. Instead of anti for either one, it's the be kind, hold space. It's a completely different way of being, but it requires an awareness that there is a narrative in the first place. Which white are we? Which black are we?
Well, you bring up something interesting as you're reading that list, and there's still more stuff on there, but what you were reading off is how the ego operates, not how humanity operates. And I think that there's a big component here. The ego needs to know, and I'm pretty sure all of us have, what are you? You know, or what are you, where are you from? Like, what the ego needs to know that. Your humanity doesn't care. Your humanity sees the unity. I mean, we did not prepare these shirts together, but Maria and I are wearing, and to this to your comment, it's called Humanity Power. So humanitypower.org, and there's some really good information on there about the isms. And what's interesting about going into this, because whenever you think of racism, most of the time, even if you Google racism right now, you're going to see black and white. Racism is not a black and white issue. It is a humanity issue. It has plagued and harmed our humanity for centuries. I am better than you. You are lower than I. And so I must categorize you, move you into this area, or I'm going to do eye for an eye. We are just harming each other. We don't have this concept of Ubuntu. I am because we are. And it's really what affects one affects all. And so instead of calling out somebody from what you perceive they are, holding space and having a dialogue, like this is a conversation that very many people wish they could have. Like I got messages like, I'm so glad that this conversation is happening. But when you start, because still the question, which is which white people are we talking about? I'm just going to answer it. We don't know. So if we don't know, we should not be making basis off of something we don't know. We should go find the answer or figure out another way to go about this, because it's not going to help us in the long run. It is only going to hurt us from the kids that we have to this next generation that's coming up. They are just going to inherit the wounds, not the scars, and telling the story from a space of transcendence. And I want to say this, like, I'm not negating that things have happened. If you look through humanity, we have used so much ego and self-preservation and apathy to create another planet. But we also are this duality. We have this humanity to us. And if we can just tap into that for a little bit, put the ego down. I really don't care what you call me. You can call me black, orange, whatever. It's not what you call me. I don't get wet by the word water. My ego does not care what you say to me. What my being knows, your being knows what you are. We have just adopted society, which has not always been in the best interest of humanity. Look at the workplace. People working 70 hours a week, pushing themselves, burning out health-wise. It's time to really rethink how we are treating each other. Is what you're saying empowering? When you say white people, are you saying it to empower them? Are you saying it to disempower them? When you say black people, are you saying it to empower you? Whatever it is, it's just really important to really think about this and critically think about it. And if you've built up so much momentum in one direction, we're not telling you to just like stop the brakes, because that is actually very dangerous. But just start to ask yourself the questions, have the conversation with the ego. Think about what that destination looks like and what's the best way to get there. Is it calling out and excluding? Or is it using the unity within our humanity to get there? Because everyone has enough shit going on. We all have enough stuff going on in our lives. We do not need to add another complicated layer that is actually really not that complicated. We're human. Be human. Honor the dichotomy of our humanness, and let's figure out ways to mitigate the parts that are harming each other and ourselves.
I love that. And something I'll add that came up while you were speaking is we can't undermine ourselves either. It's very much like how we treat others and also how we treat ourselves. Because if we're going around saying like feeling bad, like feeling sorry for ourselves for being white or for being insert whatever color here thing, then like who are we hurting? Also ourselves. And we're contributing to this to the wrong, not wrong, but it's not efficient thinking in that way, or being like, oh, I'm white, or like that side that example you gave is something that I'm seeing with my friends and with people around us, where it's like people aren't proud of who they are, but we don't have control over who we are. We just have control over how we act towards other people, towards ourselves. So in that respect, it's like you can be pink, you can be whatever polka dot, and like what matters is how you treat other people and how you treat yourself, because that's the only thing you can ever control. So don't be like down on yourself for being who you are or having whatever ability you have, or anything. Like we have to be proud, and we have to really just focus on what we can do towards others.
I just wanted to let that sit for a moment so that it sinks in for everybody who was listening. It was beautiful, Maria.
Yeah. I mean, we haven't even tapped into this privilege conversation. I think that's the
Oh
next
my
time.
God,
I mean,
that's another one.
it's again, if a word reaches you and you have a low vibrational response or reaction to it, that is cause for pause, that it is not your higher self. It is in the lower realm. It is not your best self. It is not the spiritual being that came into this physical form. We are not physical. We're not humans having a spiritual experience, else our days would look a lot different. We are humans. We are spiritual beings having a human experience. And so it's like the further we get away from our knowingness, the further we get away from that, we start to feel discord and detached, dis-ease, all of these different things. So if people are saying words to you, I want to just end kind of with this, is don't receive it, please. Like, you can receive what you choose to receive, and go into yourself in silence. There's this quote: a lot of man's problems stem from our inability to be in a room alone. Go alone and sit with yourself and be there, because you don't have to receive the narrative. You don't. Does that mean that this stuff isn't going on and things aren't happening? No, that just means that you cannot be effective if you are allowing yourself to be swept away by the problem. Like, you are most effective when you are lit up, empowered, clear, have an understanding of where you are in relationship to where you want to be. That is when you can actually make the impact. That is when you can make the difference. That's when you can stand up. If anything, if you take on any guilt, which I'm not telling anybody to, and you should not, because it's not going to help with anything, but take on the guilt of not standing into your own light. That's the only thing that you should feel bad about, if you feel bad about anything. And then the actions do perpetuate themselves from there.
You said you wanted to end there.
Yes, I think we are done for today. This has been a good starting of a conversation, and very interested to see if anyone has any specific questions for any of us. We're happy to answer them. Happy to even do another high vibe zone. And to dive in and possibly listen to some of the past ones we had. We had some really good ones. Maria brought up minority. We talked about like the N word. We talked about all of these different things. Spend some time there. We are here to help answer questions. We're not here to be like, oh, this is wrong or this is right. But we're like questioning, again, which white people are we talking about? And are we grouping people together? And the answer is we don't know. So if we don't know, we should stop going there. And we should maybe be more specific around characteristics of the behavior that we don't want to see versus talking around an entire demographic of people. I mean, that's a great way to start. So anyway.
Can I add one thing?
Yes, please.
A thought to ponder for everyone who's listening. Within Culture Circle, so part of our tribe is on this high vibe zone right now, and we have a few other amazing folks that are part of the tribe. We refer to ourselves as human. There's no title attached to it. We hold space for each other, however we show up when we have gatherings, aka meetings, but gatherings where we can connect. And it's not a regimented time, and yet we all get everything done that needs to get done. And we honor the human and the person within that space. It's a positive experience in work, no toxicity at all. So labeling human instead of COO, Chief Goddess of all awesomeness, Charisse, right? Human. We are all human. That's it.
Well, I think that's a great way to end. And Maria, I want to give you space to say anything that might be on your heart as well as we wrap up. But human, let's start seeing each other as humans first. I think that's part of the problem. We're not seeing ourselves and others. So, Maria.
Well, I echo everything, and I guess my final thought is for us to really think about why, like, again, what we have control over and what we don't. We don't have control over our skin. We are born this way, so be proud and do your best with just being you and not having stereotypes, or doing your best to minimize stereotypes and biases, because everyone is kind of on their own journey, and also everybody has different opinions. If you saw me kind of looking down, I was trying to find a quote from a book I'm reading about Benjamin Franklin, and it says, "The opinions people have are almost as various as their faces." So everybody has a different face, everyone has a different opinion, but also everybody has a different upbringing, different political views, different socioeconomic background, religions, cultures. So let's just embrace our differences, as Gerald had mentioned in his comment, and just be there for each other.
Amazing. And imagine what a world it will be. So with that, We want to thank you from our hearts to yours for being here with us in the High Vibe Zone. Like I said, if you have any questions, reach out to us. We're on LinkedIn. We're here to chat. We're here to hold space. But thank you all. You've been watching the High Vibe Zone. I'm Sharice.
I'm Maria.
And I'm Andrea.
Have a beautiful rest of your day. You're a spiritual being in physical form, a dichotomy of light and dark, where energy equals mass on a journey designed to fulfill our personal legend and purpose, to use humanity throughout, to amplify and transcend, tame the ego, raise the humanity. That's a signpost up ahead. Your next stop, the High Vibe Zone.